Because for you, Ed, the biggest thing now is how do I get caught up? So here's the problem. I was talking to Ray Dalio about this one time. Ray Dalio manages $195 billion. He's the most successful hedge fund investor in history, right? And brilliant guy. And I was saying to him, so many people are in the hole. And he goes, yeah, Tony, and the problem is they need a bigger return faster to get where they want to go. But in order to try and get bigger returns, they usually are taking bigger risks, and then they don't make it at all. I said, I know. I said, so what's the most important tool in your toolbox? I said, in all your 50-plus years of investing, if there was one principle you don't ever want to forget that guides you, what is the most important investment principle in your mind? He said, well, Tony, think about it. Risk is your challenge, and you want high returns. And usually, the higher the risk, the higher potential returns, but also the higher risk. You could lose it all. He said, I learned a mathematical formula, and he said, I call it the holy grail of investing, which is what this book's title is. It's from him. It's what I learned from him. And here's what it is. It's somewhat complex because I'm doing this so fast. It's worthy just taking the time to do it. But what he said was, if you can find 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments and invest in those, you'll reduce your risk by 80% and have the same upside or better. Now, that sounds complex. What does it mean when things are non-correlated or correlated? Well, most of you know when something's correlated, it means when one type goes up, another goes up with it. Uncorrelated would be the opposite. So, for example, when the economy is great, people tend to invest in stocks because they tend to grow the most. But when the economy is not so great, very often they have bonds that they hope will protect them. Stocks go down, bonds will be strong. They're uncorrelated most of the time. In 2022 and in the 2008 time, they both crashed. They were correlated. But it's hard to find uncorrelated investments is my point. So I left there trying to work on this, and then I was at a J.P. Morgan conference. It's called the Alternative Investments Conference, and I was a speaker there. And everyone who attends, you have to be a billionaire to go, right, to attend. And there are a lot of speakers, and right before me was Ray Dalio, who I love, and somebody asked him a question similar to I did. They said, what's the most important investment principle? And he said, I'll tell you, the holy grail of investment. And when he said this, find 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments will reduce your risk 80%. Every billionaire in the room's head went down and started writing like crazy. It's such a simple, powerful principle. But then the question is, where do you find those investments that are not correlated? It sounds complex. It is. So when I was doing my homework after doing this, trying to do it myself, I discovered something interesting. And you might want to jot this down for all of you. In the last 35 years, private equity, not public stocks and bonds and so forth and REITs, but private equity, private credit, right? Private equity, private credit, and private real estate, but I'm going to use private equity for starters, has outdone every stock market in the world every year for 35 years. Here, I'll make it simple for you. Many of you are familiar, you've heard the words the S&P 500, the top 500 companies in the New York Stock Exchange, right? Those top 500 companies are considered to be the best in that group, and you can invest in an index where you get a little piece of all of them. That's what the S&P 500 really is. Well, if you put your money in the S&P 500 for the last 35 years, it's averaged a 9.2% return. What does that mean? Well, Ed, if you're getting 5% return on your money, it's going to take you 14 and a half years to double your money. And you need to grow your money, right? That's the focus. On the other hand, if you can multiply it at 9% a year, in 8 years you double your money. But if you had your money during those 35 years in private equity, not the guys I have in this book, I interviewed 13 of the best investors in the world. These people all have done 20% compounded or more per year. One guy here did 36% for 26 years, to give you a sense. And so interestingly enough, think about this. These guys are masters, but the average private equity did 14.2%. That's a lot of numbers I'm throwing at you. Here's all you need to remember. In private equity, you can't put all your money in there because you need liquidity. So I'm trying to explain this very quickly. But private equity has been doing 50% better every year compounded. So remember that compounding of that $300? Imagine 50% more than the market every single year. Here's how you can know it. If you forget every other number I told you, just try this. If you put $1 million away, you had $1 million. You could use $1,000. Well, I use $1 million for simplicity's sake. If you had $1 million you put in the stock market, the S&P 500, 35 years ago, and you forgot about it and did nothing with it, it's worth $26 million today because of that 9% compounding. It's pretty amazing. But if you put your money not in these guys, but in the average private equity at 14.2, that same money, that same $1 million is worth $139 million. So if you'd heard nothing else, if you're going to increase your chances of going forward, this is an area you want to educate yourself in. Now, there's been a problem. That's why I didn't write this book before. One is most people, the government saves the best investments for wealthy people. It's the most stupid thing I've ever seen. It's always irritated the hell out of me. Meaning, you have to qualify to be what's called an accredited investor for some of these investments. Not all, but many of these investments. What does that mean? It means you have to have $1 million net worth, not counting your house, or you have to make at least $200,000 a year. So that leaves out almost everybody. But here's why I wrote this book. Congress, the House, just passed a few months ago. They just passed the rule, and the Senate is taking it up right now. They should finish it in the next 3 months. That says, you know what? It is not fair for wealthy people to have access. And to say they're more sophisticated as investors is not true. Because think about it. There are a lot of people that they inherited their money. They're not a sophisticated investor. Or they were good in business. They made money in business. They don't invest. So here's the punchline. You don't need $1 million. You won't need to be able to have $200,000 a year in income. As soon as they pass in the Senate, which should happen in the next 90 days, you'll have a unique opportunity to have the same investments because you'll take a test. They show you to prepare. If you pass the test, you're an accredited investor, and now you get the same types of opportunities to compound higher than other people. Now, not everything can go in alternative investments. You need diversification. You're going to need public stock markets for liquidity because your money gets tied up in these environments. Again, I'm trying to explain too much in too short a time. What I want to get across to you is there's a way to grow this faster than you can imagine. And here's